Howdy guys, welcome back to BIG Photography. This is Ben, and this is our fourth and final video for this image. And in this video, we're going to be talking about something that I haven't really covered much in my previous videos, and that's color grading, color toning your image. So what I'm going to do in this video is we are going to go over some of the tools that Affinity Photo has for color grading your image. And then I'll show you some of my favorite ones, and then we're going to try to give this image a kind of fine art look in the end. So with all that said, let's just jump right in. All right, welcome back. So just as a really quick recap what we've done so far, in our last video we went ahead and changed the background color just by doing something like that. And in the previous two videos we did our dodging and burning and all of our retouching to go from this original image and turn it into this. And you can see we did a lot of really great work on our skin. Now it looks really fantastic. Did some liquefaction on the eyes, give her more sultry expression, and then change that background color. So now we have this. And this background color is really going to help accentuate the color grade that we're going to be doing in this video. So let's just go ahead and get started with that. So as opposed to making a kind of color grading tutorial, going over color theory or things like that, I really want to just introduce the color tools that are available in Affinity Photo and show you how they work so that you can start using that knowledge to color grade your own photos. So let's go ahead and introduce some of the 4 or 5 color tools that I use quite often when I'm grading my images and kind of quickly explain how they work, and then we'll do a nice quick edit of this image right here. So starting off the bat, we've got one called split toning, which I really like because this is a great way to just quickly add a color into your highlight area and a color into your shadow area. So here you have these 4 sliders. We have a highlights hue, saturation, shadow hue, and saturation. Let's say we want to add some yellows into the highlights. So I'm going to move the slider to the yellow part, somewhere maybe around here. And I'm going to move this highlight saturation slider up. And as you see, as I start moving it up, you know, we start seeing a lot of yellow put into the skin. If I go all the way to 100%, you can see that it's really only affecting the highlight areas of the image, and it's not really having any effect on the background or her hair or her eye color and things like that. You can even see the cutoff where it's not even affecting this side of her face. So let's bring this down to kind of get it looking a little more natural. And then if we want to do a classic kind of cool shadows, warm highlights, let's move this shadow slider to around the blue and pull those shadows up. And here you will see that this blue is having a big effect in the background, but again, it's only really touching the dark areas. Now it's really having a harsh effect on the shadow side of her face and the shadow parts of her body, but not really having much effect on the highlights. So if we bring that down to a little more reasonable level, we can do something like that, and maybe bump up this a little more. And we have a balance slider, which just basically allows us to balance between the highlights and the shadows. So you can kind of find a nice little balance between the two. And if you see like this, it can be kind of subtle, but we've kind of given this image a different feeling, a different tone, just by using this split toning slider. So I think this is a great tool if you just want to quickly give a nice little, split tone, usually something with complementary colors, but it could be any color you want. And you can always adjust the hue slider here and change. Maybe we want some more reds in the highlights. Maybe we want to do something kind of green in the shadows. You can do all kind of interesting things with this tool. So let's just go ahead and bring this back down to something like a yellow and keep it in the kind of teal, orange, blue range. And we'll do that. All right, let's go ahead and turn that off, and let's look at another tool. Another tool that I use quite often is going to be the gradient map, actually. Now, the gradient map can sometimes be confusing, especially when you first turn it on, because you get this crazy kind of solar type image. But let me just quickly explain how this works. So it's pretty easy. So this bar down here represents the tonal range of your image, with the area on the left being the shadows, middle highlights, and the area on the right being your, the middle is your midtones, and on the right is your highlights. So right now, these colors are set to red, green, and blue. I don't know why that's a default color. It always looks funky, but of course we can change those colors. So if we're going to try to do something like our last example, and we want to add some highlights, add some yellows into the highlights, we can select this area here, and we'll come down to color, and let's actually switch that into something yellow. We'll just maybe somewhere around here. And let's go to our shadow area, click here, and then we can add some blue. And right now the mids are still green, so why don't we make it a bit more neutral, and we can maybe make it a skin tone color, something maybe a little more on the yellow side, maybe something kind of skin tone-ish here, and do something like that. Now, of course, this looks really weird, but this is where the power of blend modes comes in. So we're going to change our blend mode to soft light, and you can see right off the bat that has a very dramatic effect, and we can make it look a little more natural by lowering the opacity. And we lower the opacity, something like that. Now we have this really interesting tonal variation of this image. If I turn that off and on, you can kind of see it's very subtle. And if we compare it with our last one, if I go ahead and turn off, this is nothing. This is our gradient map. And I turn it off, and let's turn on our split toning. You know, it kind of has a very similar effect, and I'm sure that if I tweaked either one enough, I could get them looking pretty similar. So gradient map is another way to affect different ranges. And the cool thing about it is you can actually add as many points as you want. If you double click somewhere around here, you can add another point. You can add a point here. So sometimes I might want to have my blacks be totally neutral and be black like that. And then I'll take this shadow side and I'll maybe add some color into here. Maybe bring it down closer to that end. And same thing, maybe I want my highlights to be just kind of more toward the white side, and then make this more our highlight area, maybe a bright yellow, something like that. Maybe I can move it more here. And you can move these around, and you can really get some really unique and really cool color effects by using the gradient map. You'll find that you can use overlay and hard light, but I find that soft light just tends to have the most natural looking result. It kind of does a nice job of blending the colors together really nice. There's a nice roll off and a nice transition between colors. So you can experiment with different blend modes, but I find that soft light tends to look the best. So let's go ahead and turn that one off, and let's look at another tool. So there's two more tools that are often used by me, and they're really similar. And you've got color balance and then selective color. So let's start with color balance. So color balance is quite interesting, because what color balance is going to do is it's going to shift different ranges into different colors. So here we have a shadows, midtones, and highlights. So it's almost very similar to split toning, where I can grab the highlights, and instead of having that hue slider, we actually have our cyan, red, magenta, green, yellow, blue slider. And so this is going to allow us to take that highlight area, and you can either slide those highlights more toward the cyan end, put more red in the highlights, more purple, more green, or of course any combination of them. So if we want to put some more yellows in the highlights, we're going to actually move this slider and start pushing it toward yellow. And then we want to go to our shadows, and we can start putting some blue into the shadows, maybe even a little bit of cyan, just a little bit. And then maybe a tad of green to kind of give it more of a teal sea green type look. And there you can see there, we have generated a very similar effect as our last two. Now each one is going to be a little bit different. I think even this gradient is a bit harsh, so we can actually turn that down a little bit. And you can kind of see sometimes you can use them in combination. A lot of times I actually do use multiple color adjustments in combination with each other. But if we go back to our color balance here, this is a great way of just shifting the colors into different areas. Now there is something very interesting when we compare it to the next tool, which is split toning, selective color. And we'll talk about that in a second. But this is a great way to just kind of, you know, adjust the colors in certain ranges of your image. Let's go ahead and turn that off, and let's look at one more. The main ones. There's a few more after I'll talk about in a second, but these are the main ones. So we're going to go selective color. Now selective color is different in the sense where you are able to actually select a particular color you like and change basically that color's color. So let's, for example, let's go to our reds. Now in a portrait photo, you know, let's turn off this color balance as well. In a portrait photo, because we're shooting people, we're going to have a lot of colors that are going to be in the red and yellow range. So if I can select the red, if I start taking out, let's say I think that there's that her skin's got too much red in it. I want to actually lower the redness of her skin. Well, if we come down here, we've got cyan, magenta, yellow, black. I don't see any red slider, so how do I take out red? Well, an easy way to look at that And this is why I like to use the color wheel option up here. If your thing doesn't look like this, you can come to this little pull down menu here, and you'll have wheel, sliders, or boxes. These are just different ways that you can look at your colors or choose your colors when you're just picking a color. And I like to use the wheel just because I like to have a visual representation of the color wheel. So let's say we want to remove red from her skin. Well, because we don't have a red slider, what we have to do is find red on the color wheel, which is here. And if we look at the totally opposite side of the color wheel, we've got cyan. So by removing cyan, we're basically going to be taking cyan out of that color, which is going to be revealing more red. So if we start pulling out cyan, we're going to be adding red. If we start adding cyan, we're going to be taking out red. So if I feel that her skin's a bit too red for me, I can start adding cyan. And it's adding cyan, and in a sense, it's kind of subtracting red from the image. If I go all the way, you'll see that her skin now starts to become a bit like palish green looking. But here's a great way to remove colors and add colors to certain areas of the image. If I feel, okay, there's a bit too much yellow as well, I can start taking out yellow. And if we look here, here's yellow on the color wheel. If we start taking out yellow, we're going to start adding blue. And we'll see that if I start pulling yellow out, because there's enough red in her image, it's actually kind of become a bit purple. But you can see how these colors work. And you can do all kind of crazy color adjustments and do things like this. And another neat thing about it, let's go ahead and reset that, is you have your reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, magenta, whites, and you have whites, neutrals, and blacks. And it's best to think of these as whites as the highlights, neutrals as your midtones, and blacks as your shadows. But they do work a little bit differently. So for example, let's go to our blacks, and let's say we want to add some blue into our blacks. So how do we do that? Well, just like before, we have our yellow slider here. If we want to add blue, we have to take out yellow, so it goes this direction. So we're going to start taking out yellow, and you're going to see that blue is being added to the image. But one thing you'll notice as you start getting deeper and deeper and deeper is that that dark area, that black area, has now just become a solid, fully saturated blue because it's basically added blue to the blacks. And so you have to be really careful when you are using this selective color with the shadows and the highlights, because it can really have really harsh effects on your shadows. For example, if I reset that and we do the exact same thing with color balance, if I go to the shadows and start adding blue to the color balance, it still preserves that true black. It just kind of adds a little bit of color to the black without actually changing the black into blue completely. So again, this is something that you just kind of have to play around with and see what you like using. But if we go to here, and same thing with the whites, you know, we can start adding a lot of color into the highlight area. You can see her white is basically just a shirt, and by adding different colors, we can make the highlights yellow. We can maybe add a little bit of blue into the black, but just being a little bit careful. Add some cyan and maybe a little bit of blue, just to be a little careful here. And then we can highlight just her reds and say maybe her red lipstick's a bit too harsh. We want it to be more, I don't know, less red. We can add some cyan. It's going to take some of that red out of her skin. Maybe add a little magenta. All kind of cool things you can do. And this is a great way to do some really creative effects, because you can really have really specific control over certain areas. Now, because this is a very kind of almost monotone type portrait, let's go ahead and reset this. You know, if I select, say, like, you know, magentas, you know, none of these sliders are going to do anything just because there is no magenta in the image. So you're not having any effect. Even probably greens. If I go to greens, you know, these sliders have zero effect just because there's no green in the image. But green's really great when you're doing outdoor portraits, because you can really change the tone of the trees outside. Maybe make them look more brown for a more fall look, make them more vibrant for just a more poppy look, just whatever you're in the mood for. And one more cool thing about this black slider. So let's say we go to our reds. You can use this black slider to basically like make the skin brighter and also make it naturally darker. So you can see here, we've almost kind of given her like a tan look. We basically made her skin look really dark. So this is a really great tool to use when you want to kind of maybe just darken up the skin a little bit, or maybe, you know, brighten up the skin. When you brighten, you do lose a lot of contrast, so you got to be careful about that. but that is our selective color tool. All right, so there are a few other tools where you can, of course, do color. Sometimes I'll frequently use curves. A lot of people just use curves to do your kind of contrast. You know, you do your classic S curve, you pull that down, pull the highlights up and do a contrast. But don't forget, you can also pull the curves down for each individual color. If we want to do something like we were doing before, and we want to add yellow into the highlights, well, here we have a blue slider. If we want to add yellow, we got to take out blue. Let's take out some blue from the highlights, and you'll start to see here that we get blue. Now, because this curve goes almost all the way down to the shadows, we might have to correct this by pulling it back up toward the middle and kind of straightening that line out so that it's only really being pulled down in the shadow area. And if we want to add blue to the shadows, we can just pull up the shadows like that and kind of do like a reverse S curve with that, and maybe pull down the highlights directly, and maybe add maybe take out some red in the midtones because it's a bit coming off red, and maybe pull down some red, which is going to basically give green in the shadows. So you can do a lot of really creative color grading with the curves. So this is another great tool that you can use for color grading. So set that. And so basically even levels is very similar. You can select the red and green channel and adjust the blacks and the whites of each channel in the levels menu. I don't use this one too much for doing color grading, but that is there. And of course, you even have your HSL, where you could basically say, okay, here's the reds, and let's lower the saturation of the red. Let's raise the saturation of the red. Let's completely change the hue of the red. This is probably a lot more of a heavy-handed effect where you can really basically turn her into the Hulk if you want. You can turn her into like an Avatar type character. This is, I think, more for creative looks, but I use it quite a bit when I just want to reduce saturation in certain areas. If I feel her skin's a bit too saturated, I can highlight the reds and I can lower that a bit. You can also select one of these chips here and then do a picker and maybe pick one specific color. So maybe I want to pick this background green, and it's going to automatically select that for me. And then now I have total control of just that green, so I can come back here and change the color of the background, lower its saturation, raise its saturation, do all kinds of fun stuff like that. So these are the main tools that I often use when I am color grading. So with all that said, why don't we just group these all together, and this will be called our our grade. We'll call it just grade. Our grade folder, and that way they're all there. I can turn them all off on at once. So let's just do a really quick grade for that kind of fine art look. And I got two other cool tips at the end, and I have a little surprise at the end for you. So just try to watch to the end. Alrighty, and what am I gonna do here? So let's try first, maybe do some color balance. I like that. So we're gonna go to color balance here, and let's just go back to our classic, adding a little bit of blue in those shadows, and then maybe some yellow in the highlights. Very subtle, and I do like maybe the midtones where they're at. Maybe the midtones are a bit too red. So I'm going to actually start shifting it toward the cyan just to pull some of that red out of her skin. Not too much, just a little bit. And then let's go back to our shadows, and maybe let's just add a little bit of cyan to the shadows. Let's actually not go, let's just go -2%. And then maybe a hint of green, maybe just a touch of green, maybe just a 1% of green. Let's click 1 and do something like that. And now we can go back to our highlights, maybe add a little bit more yellow to something like that. Let's save that. I'm happy with some of the other things here. We could do a gradient map if we wanted to get really creative. And here you can see that gradient map was pretty cool. Let's actually change this blue to almost a more like teal green look. Let's see what this does. And here, let's get her skin tone not so, let's actually kind of smooth this down a bit. This is kind of too brown for me. Maybe go back to orange, and maybe this yellow might be a little bit too harsh. We're going to aim it more toward orange here. Do something like that. And then now we can go over here and play with the look. Maybe just add a little bit of different kind of look here. And let's see if we like this. So this is before, and this is after, a little bit more of a creative color grade here. And then maybe if I want to play around with selective color, That's on. Let's go ahead and reset that. But that does look kind of cool, actually. Let's go ahead and reset this. What did we do here? So let's reset that. Maybe let's actually play with her skin tone a little bit. I think her skin tone maybe is a tad. Actually, I think it looks okay. Maybe if I want to take out a little bit of yellow, I'm just going to pull the yellow out of it a little bit, which is interesting because we just put a lot of yellow in the highlights. And maybe let's add some red by taking out some of the cyan. So let's maybe add a little bit of red in there. Yeah, something like that. And then now we can actually play maybe with the blacks. Do we want to like mess around with this? Maybe not so much. I think the blacks are probably okay with it where they are at. We can try doing. It's always nice to play. I'm always playing because, you know, you can kind of like in your mind, you know what's going to happen, but you don't really know until you actually start pulling sliders and see. Because sometimes you might pull a slider and go, hey, well, that looks kind of really cool. I like that look. I might want to do that. So I do recommend just moving sliders back and forth. You can always undo. You can always reset back to 0. And as far as her skin, yeah, I think that looks fine where it's at now. I don't need to adjust the darkness of it. Maybe I want to pull out the saturation of it a little bit. So for that, I might switch over to a HSL and just highlight her skin, the reds, and just pull out some of the saturation just a tad like that. Okay, so that's before. And that is after. Now there's 2 other things that I like to do that can be, well, one other thing really, that can add a really cool look, and that is just doing a fill layer overlay under soft light. So on top of all this, I want to add a new fill layer. I'm going to layer, new fill layer. And here it's set to yellow right now because our color was yellow. So let's go ahead and move this. Let's make sure we have our move tool selected. And now we can choose any color here on the color wheel. Let's try something around this yellow, kind of slightly orangey yellow. And then let's use our magic blend. Let's actually pull this out of that folder. And let's actually switch this to our awesome soft light. And then we can start pulling this down. And that kind of gives a very overall yellow look to it, as you can see there. And the cool thing, as long as we have our move tool selected, we can always come around here and actually change the color. Maybe we want to get more blue, maybe a weird purple might look nice. And a few other little tricks too is maybe I like this yellow, but I don't like it really affecting the shadows so much. So what do? We can go into our blend ranges and I can basically tell it don't have any effect on the shadows. You can kind of see like it's affecting the background quite a bit here, but if I pull this down, I'm telling it don't have effect on the shadows, just affect from basically this point on. You can also make it linear if you want a bit more of a gradual roll off, and maybe you don't have to go that far. We can kind of play around and do something like that. That is quite harsh, so I'm gonna actually pull that down a bit, and we can still come over here and adjust this color manually. And another thing I like to do if we're going to go for our kind of fine art look, let's open up curves here. So a lot of times when you're looking at kind of paintings, like physical paintings, because it's physical paint on a canvas, depending on the light that's falling on it, you don't ever really see like a deep black like you see on a computer monitor. So to emulate that effect a bit, let's actually just kind of raise the shadows up a bit. Let's actually pull the slider up. We're actually going to lower the contrast just a tad to something kind of like that. And that might kind of give us that more of like a painterly look where it's not so harsh as far as contrast goes. So we'll do something like that. And this is our before. And let's turn that off too. Let's actually change this color a bit. I think I do want a little bit more of an effect, but let's see what happens. This is our grade now on, and here you can see it is quite yellow, but that may be what we're going for. We might like this look. If not, we can always change our mind, and maybe that looks kind of cool too. Like there's a lot of really cool things you can do, a lot of really cool looks you can play around with. So it's a great way to play. All right, so if you got this far in the video, I do have a little bonus for you, which you could probably see in the description if you read it, is that I made a little background texture using basically a picture of my wall in my apartment. And then I just used Affinity Photo to basically paint random paint with some watercolor brushes, kind of create this really interesting background. So with that there, I'm going to go ahead and merge all these down. So I have a pixel layer. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to basically paste it above where we have, below that mask. Remember, we have this mask where she's basically cut out from the background, right? So this is where we change the color of the background by adding that fill layer. So what I'm going to do is let's actually turn that off and see what happens. I'm going to basically paste that new background in there, and it should turn it behind her. And there it is, it's right behind her. Let's actually stretch it out to get it covering the whole image, and maybe do something like this. And if we put that color back, you're not going to see any difference. But if we switch this to soft light, it does kind of add an interesting effect. Now this is with the background color off. You may like that. That's with the background color on. It might be, of course, a bit harsh. So by just lowering the opacity a little bit, you know, we've kind of now added, if we can zoom in a bit, you can kind of see we've added an interesting texture to the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a link to this background thing in the description, so you can download it and use it for your own photos or your portraits or whatever. And you can just kind of play around with it a little bit here. And if you want to get really wild, like really crazy, let's actually turn that off. You can actually put this just on top of everything. Let's see what that does. Now it's on top of everything, so it's covering everything up, of course. But why don't we switch it to our favorite blend mode, soft light, and maybe lower the opacity. And maybe I want to say, hey, you know, don't mess with this, don't affect the highlights so much. Let's actually make a point here, maybe pull that down so it's not having so much effect on the highlights. And there we've basically kind of added, if we zoom in a bit, you can kind of see we've added kind of interesting texture over the whole image. And you can still play around with the intensity there. Maybe we can turn that back on to get it more in the background and do kind of fun stuff like that. And there you go. So this is our after everything. And let's just stick it all together. So that was our before. That was our starting image. Already looks great. And then we turned it into this bad boy, which, you know, this is subjective. I'm not going to pretend I'm some amazing colorist, or it's just a kind of an interesting effect that I thought might be kind of cool for this video. And I just wanted to introduce the different color tools that are available in Affinity Photo, because you actually do have a lot of really interesting ways to affect color. So I think that is going to be it for this video. We did some fun stuff along the way, so thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you, especially if you're here at the end listening to me. And a while back I hit over 500 subscribers, so after a year doing it, I'm pretty happy about that. So let's see how far we can go. Anyways, thank you very much guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. All right guys, thanks a lot. Bye.